Bertha has come ashore and the storm is losing steam faster than most people anticipated. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your meteorologist, and today is Thursday, July 23rd, 2026. The satellite image might look a bit alarming at first, with a wide sprawling cloud mass covering much of the Gulf. But look closer and you'll see the storm's actual center is tucked into one corner, almost separate from its own cloud cover. That's because strong upper-level wind shear is tearing through the top of the system, ripping apart thunderstorms as quickly as they form and pushing all the activity to one side, instead of letting it wrap around the center like a healthy tropical system would. That's genuinely good news for anyone in Bertha's path. Shear works in our favor during hurricane season, and we'll walk through what it means for storm surge and other impacts before we head over to the Pacific and Caribbean, where there's plenty going on today too. If you're subscribed, you'll get notified whenever I post, but I won't clutter your feed just to stay visible. I'd rather post only when there's something worth your time. Let's start with the headline news. Bertha made its initial landfall in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana on Wednesday, becoming this Atlantic season's second named storm. By last night, it had already moved back across southeastern Louisiana and out toward open water, sitting about 75 miles southwest of New Orleans and roughly 135 miles east-southeast of Lake Charles, as of the latest update. Sustained winds have fallen to around 45 meters, and the storm continues crawling west at about 12 millimeters, with little change in strength or direction over recent hours. A tropical storm warning still covers the coast from the Alabama-Mississippi border to Sargent, Texas, including Greater New Orleans and Lake Pontchartrain. So if you're anywhere in that zone, you're technically still under the warning, even though the worst wind has passed for most locations. For context, Bertha arrived just weeks after Tropical Storm Arthur. This season's first named storm, which made landfall in Texas back in June. That means two named systems have formed in the Gulf within a little over a month, right? In line with the typical seasonal pace, since forecasters usually expect two named storms by mid-July. What's made Bertha simpler to forecast is that it's stayed messy and poorly organized basically its whole life. Most of its rain and wind has stayed south and east of the center, out over open water, rather than wrapping tightly around a defined eye like a more dangerous storm would. The center is expected to keep drifting west and reach the upper Texas coast by Friday, likely somewhere between Houston and Angleton, with the center possibly nearing the Brazos River by early evening. By then, though, we're really talking about a weak remnant, nothing like what first hit Louisiana. Some models even show the center hopping around unpredictably as it interacts with land that's normal for a disorganized, sheared-out system like this one. So if another source reports the center suddenly reappearing somewhere new, don't be alarmed. It doesn't mean the storm is regaining strength. I've reviewed several forecast models for Bertha, and while they mostly agree on the general westward track, they diverge on how much strength the storm holds onto one model. In particular, tends to run too aggressive compared to what typically verifies. When models disagree on strength but agree on path, I lean toward the more conservative numbers, since a storm already fighting. This much shear rarely surprises everyone by intensifying. That's the value of comparing multiple models, instead of chasing whichever one makes the most dramatic headline, when most of them align on a theme that consensus is more reliable than any single outlier. Now storm surge, even a weakening tropical storm can push meaningful water on shore, and that's not something to dismiss. Most of the affected coasts should see surge of 13 feet above normal tide, with higher values of 24 feet in eastern Louisiana from the Mississippi River mouth toward the Alabama state line. That won't produce catastrophic flooding like a major hurricane would, but it's enough to cause beach erosion overwash on low roads and flooding in the usual trouble spots, the same intersections and driveways that flood every time there's a strong onshore push. If you live along the coast and know your area floods easily, trust your own knowledge of your street over any general forecast. Rainfall has generally totaled 24 inches along the coast, with some areas near 8 inches where heavier bands lingered and a few pockets could still approach the higher totals. Flagged earlier in the week, Gulf seas have been running 10-12 feet worth noting if you're boating or fishing, since the water can stay rough well after the wind dies down. We're also watching secondary hazards, gusty winds up to 40-55. Meminaph in stronger bands along the Florida, Panhandle, Alabama, and Mississippi coasts, with a small chance of an isolated tornado or waterspout similar to what Arthur brought to Louisiana and Texas back in June. Beaches from Florida to Mississippi have closed as a precaution, while Bertha's tropical storm force winds extending over 100 miles from the center continue affecting the coastline. Officials also warn that dangerous rip currents can persist for days after the storm passes, since the ocean takes time to settle. Lifeguards have already pulled swimmers from stronger, than usual currents, even in areas that saw no rain from Bertha. That's an underappreciated risk with tropical systems. Ocean impacts often outlast the storm itself on land. Overall, the message is steady, gradual weakening. Bertha should keep losing strength as it moves along the coast and inland. It'll flag anything unexpected, but right now, this is a monitor mode situation, not an active emergency for most of the warned area. I'd rather give calm, accurate updates than raise unnecessary alarm, just to hold your attention. Nothing wastes your energy like preparing for a storm that never really threatens you, and I know how draining it is to brace repeatedly for something that fizzles out. Shifting to the eastern and central Pacific, Hurricane Fausto is now the season's first hurricane out there, putting on a far more impressive show than Bertha. As of the latest advisory, it's a Category 1 with sustained winds of 7,580 mid-pH centered a few hundred miles southwest of the Baja Peninsula's tip, and moving west-northwest around 12 mil-polar. Hurricane force winds extend 2,530 miles from the center, while tropical storm force winds reach out up to 160 miles, a broad system even though its core isn't huge. Forecasters expect slight additional strengthening over the next day, though dry air is disrupting